The mill had been dead for 6 years before Agnes Calhoun ever saw it, and the man who told her about it, a teamster named Greer, who hauled freight between Greenville and Jonesboro, mentioned it only because she had asked if there was any kind of shelter within walking distance of the road that did not belong to someone who would run her off. Greer looked at her the way men on the Tennessee frontier looked at women alone, with a calculation that was part pity and part assessment of what she might be worth as labor, and told her about the Lyle Mill on Lick Creek, 4 miles south, abandoned since the dam broke in the flood of 1879. He told her the mill building itself had collapsed, the wheel was gone, and the property was tangled in a legal dispute between the Lyle heirs that had kept it unsold and untouched for half a decade. He told her nobody would bother her there because nobody wanted anything to do with the place. Agnes was 27 years old. She had been a wife for 5 years and a widow for 4 months, and in those 4 months she had learned that the distance between a married woman and a destitute one was exactly the width of a pine coffin. Her husband, David Calhoun, had worked a tenant farm in Greene County until the August fever took him. 3 days of shaking and sweating and calling for water and then silence. The landowner reclaimed the farm within a week. David's family, his mother and 2 brothers in Knoxville, sent word that they could not take her in, a message delivered with the particular cruelty of a sentence that ends with a period where a human being needed a hand. She was a tall woman, 5'7", unusual for the time, with a long face, dark auburn hair that she wore in a single heavy braid down her back, pale green eyes set deep under a straight brow, and the angular frame of someone built for endurance rather than strength. Her hands were large for a woman's, long-fingered with prominent knuckles, calloused at the palms from hoe work and scrub work and every other kind of work that tenant farm wives did from the hour they woke to the hour they collapsed. She wore a dark green wool dress that had been her best and was now her only, a brown canvas coat with frayed cuffs and leather boots that she had resoled with pieces of a harness strap. She carried a canvas sack that held a change of underclothes, a sewing kit, a tin cup, a small Bible, and $2.30. She walked the 4 miles to the Lyle Mill on a cold afternoon in late November 1885, following Lick Creek south through a valley of bare hardwood forest. Oak, hickory, tulip poplar, their branches stripped to gray skeletons against a sky that was the color of old pewter. The creek ran clear and cold over a bed of flat stones, and she followed it until the valley narrowed and the creek bent east, and there, built into the hillside above the bend, was the mill race. The mill itself was gone, collapsed into a heap of rotting timber and stone that had been slowly consumed by the forest for 6 years, honeysuckle and Virginia creeper weaving through the debris. The water wheel was gone, sold for scrap probably, or carried downstream by the flood that broke the dam. The dam itself was a ruin, a crescent of stacked stone across the creek with a 20-foot gap in the center where the floodwater had punched through. But the mill race was intact. A mill race is the channel that carries water from the dam to the water wheel, a controlled flow of water that drops in elevation over the length of the race, building the head pressure that turns the wheel. The Lyle Mill race was not an open ditch. It was a stone tunnel, a covered channel built from cut limestone blocks, 6 feet wide, 5 feet tall, and 42 feet long, running from the old dam site to the ruins of the mill building. The tunnel was built to carry the full flow of Lick Creek through a confined space at high velocity, and it was built to withstand the pressure of that flow, the weight of the earth above it, and the occasional surge of floodwater that could double the creek's volume in an hour. The walls were 2 feet thick. The ceiling was a continuous stone arch, a barrel vault like a Roman aqueduct that distributed the weight of the hillside above evenly along the length of the tunnel. The floor was flagstone, worn smooth by 6 years of water that no longer flowed because the dam no longer held. The race was dry. With the dam broken, the creek flowed through the gap in the dam and continued down its natural channel, bypassing the race entirely. The tunnel was empty. A stone tube set into the hillside, open at both ends, with dry flagstone underfoot and the faint smell of old moss and wet stone fading into the cool, still air of a space that had not held water in half a decade. Agnes stood at the upstream entrance and looked down the 42-foot length of the stone tunnel. The late afternoon light entered from both ends, meeting in the middle in a dim gray glow that illuminated the barrel vault ceiling and the smooth limestone walls and the dry flagstone floor. The air was still. The temperature inside the tunnel was warmer than the November air outside, perhaps 10 degrees warmer, because the stone walls and the earth above were insulating the interior from the wind and the falling air temperature, the same way a cave maintains a constant temperature year-round. She walked the length of the race, running her hand along the limestone wall. The stone was cool, but not cold. The joints were tight. The mason who had built this race had fitted the blocks with the precision of a man who knew that water under pressure would find any weakness and exploit it, and the mortar between the blocks was as hard and sound as the stone itself. The barrel vault overhead was uncracked, unsagged, as geometrically perfect as the day it was built. The flagstone floor was level and dry, 42 feet long, 6 feet wide, 5 feet tall. It was not enough height to stand upright. Agnes would have to duck slightly, her braid brushing the vault above. But it was enough. It was shelter. It was stone. It was dry. It was wind-proof. And it was hers for the taking, because nobody alive wanted a broken mill race on a dead creek in a valley that the law had forgotten. She set her canvas sack on the flagstone and sat down with her back against the limestone wall and felt the stone hold her weight without giving, without flexing, without complaint. And she thought, this is where I stay. If you want to know what a widow with $2 built inside a stone tunnel that the creek had abandoned and the world had forgotten, subscribe to The Warm Floor and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. The first problem was the openings. The mill race was a tunnel, open at both ends, with the upstream entrance facing the broken dam and the downstream entrance opening onto the ruins of the mill building. Air flowed freely through the tunnel from end to end, carrying away whatever warmth the stone walls held and replacing it with the cold November wind that swept down the Lick Creek Valley. The tunnel was sheltered from rain and snow by the barrel vault and the hillside above, but it was not sheltered from moving air, and moving air was the enemy of warmth. Agnes sealed the upstream entrance first. She built a wall across the 6-foot-wide opening using flat stones gathered from the broken dam, the same cut limestone blocks that had once held back the creek, now piled in the stream bed downstream of the gap. The stones were heavy, 60 to 100 pounds each, and she carried them one at a time up the bank to the tunnel entrance, a distance of 30 yards and an elevation gain of 8 feet that she covered hundreds of times over 3 days until her legs trembled with each step and she could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. She stacked the stones dry. No mortar, just careful fitting in the dry stack tradition. each stone shimmed with smaller stones to eliminate gaps, the wall rising course by course until it filled the entrance to within 6 inches of the vault crown. The 6-inch gap at the top she left open intentionally, a ventilation slot that would admit fresh air while preventing the bulk of the wind from entering the tunnel. The downstream entrance became the door. She built a similar stone wall across the lower 2/3 of this opening, reducing it from a 6-by-5-foot rectangle to a 6-by-2-foot doorway at the top. Over the doorway, she hung a double layer of heavy canvas, a wagon cover she found in the mill ruins, stiff with age but still waterproof, weighted at the bottom with stones. The canvas door could be pushed aside to enter and fell shut behind her, sealing the opening against wind while remaining easy to open. With both ends sealed, the tunnel transformed. The wind stopped. The air went still. The temperature, which had been 42 degrees with the ends open, rose to 48 degrees within a day as the earth surrounding the tunnel reasserted its influence. The hillside above and on both sides maintaining the stone at a near constant temperature that the still air inside the sealed tunnel gradually matched. 48 degrees was not warm, but 48 degrees without wind, without rain, without snow was a foundation that a fire could build on. The fireplace was the most important construction. Agnes built it against the sealed upstream wall, a stone hearth of flat creek stones with a fire back of stacked limestone, positioned so that the smoke rose into the 6-inch ventilation gap at the top of the wall and exited through the slot to the outside. The natural draft created by the gap, warm air rising, pulling fresh air in through the canvas door at the far end, provided ventilation without sacrificing significant heat. The limestone fireback absorbed the fire's heat and radiated it into the tunnel, and the barrel vault ceiling acted as a reflector, bouncing the rising warm air back down along the curved stone surface and distributing it along the full length of the 42-foot space. The effect was remarkable. The barrel vault functioned as a natural heat distributor. The warm air from the fire rose to the crown of the arch and spread in both directions along the curved ceiling, radiating heat downward as it traveled, creating a uniform warmth along the length of the tunnel that no flat-ceilinged room could match. The stone walls, heated by the conducted warmth from the fire and from the warm air flowing along the vault, stored that heat in their 2-foot thickness and released it slowly over 12 to 14 hours. The flagstone floor, heated from below by the earth and from above by the radiant warmth of the walls and vault, became a surface that was never cold, cool at worst, warm at best, and always warmer than the air outside. Agnes divided the 42-foot tunnel into zones. The first 12 feet from the upstream wall was the living area, the fireplace, a sleeping platform of planks laid across stone supports with a straw tick and quilts, a rough table and bench made from mill timbers, and a shelf of flat stones set into gaps in the wall for storing food and supplies. The middle section, 15 feet, was storage and workspace, where she kept firewood, tools, and supplies, and where she did her sewing and mending work by the light of a candle and the glow from the fire at the far end. The last 15 feet, nearest the canvas door, was the coolest section. She used it as a cold pantry, storing milk, cheese, and vegetables at the naturally cool temperature of 45 degrees that the stone maintained near the entrance. The total cost of the conversion was $0. Every material was gathered, salvaged, or found. The stones came from the broken dam. The canvas came from the mill ruins. The timber for the sleeping platform and table came from the collapsed mill building. The tools, a hammer, a chisel, a handsaw were borrowed from a farmer 2 miles down the valley in exchange for 3 days of mending work. Agnes spent none of her $2.30 on the mill race itself. She saved the money for food, flour, salt, coffee, purchased at the general store in Greenville, a 10-mile walk each way that she made once a month through the winter. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to share it and subscribe to The Warm Floor, because stories like these deserve to be remembered. The town of Greenville learned about the mill race through a farmer named Hicks who grazed cattle in the Lick Creek Valley and who rode past the old Lyle Mill site in December and saw smoke rising from the hillside where no smoke had risen in 6 years. He investigated and found the sealed tunnel, the canvas door, and, when Agnes invited him inside, a stone corridor that was warmer than his own farmhouse parlor. Hicks told the story at the feed store in Greenville, and the feed store was where Owen Price heard it. Owen was the county assessor, a precise man in his 50s with wire spectacles and a ledger book that he carried like a Bible, who knew the tax status of every property in Greene County and who regarded people who lived on disputed land without title as a species of vermin. He also knew that the Lyle property was in legal limbo and that no taxes had been paid on it since the heirs began their dispute, which meant that no one, including Agnes Calhoun, had the legal right to occupy it. Owen did not ride out to the mill race. He did not need to. He delivered his assessment from the feed store counter with the certainty of a man who had never been wrong about a property line. The Calhoun woman is squatting in a drainage ditch on property she doesn't own. When the Lyle heirs settle their business, she'll be removed. In the meantime, she's living in a water pipe. That's not a home. That's a culvert with a blanket over the end. The word spread. Mill race, drainage ditch, water pipe, culvert. The descriptions grew less generous with each telling, and by January, the general opinion in Greenville was that Agnes Calhoun was a pitiable case living in conditions that no sane person would accept. None of them had been inside. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button right now. It is free, takes a second, and helps The Warm Floor reach more people who need to hear it. Now back to the story. The winter of 1885 to 86 was the test that every frontier shelter had to pass, and the mill race passed it with a margin that would have astonished Owen Price if he had bothered to investigate rather than pronounce. January brought 2 weeks of temperatures below 20 degrees, with nighttime lows reaching 8 below zero. The Lick Creek Valley filled with cold air that pooled in the low ground and froze everything it touched. The creek, the road, the bare trees, the standing water in every field and hollow. The mill race held at 52 degrees. The stone walls, 2 feet of cut limestone backed by the mass of the hillside, did not respond to the surface temperature. The barrel vault, buried under 4 feet of earth, was insulated from the outside air by the most effective insulation on Earth itself. The flagstone floor, in contact with the ground below the frost line, maintained a stable temperature that never dropped below 45 degrees, and Agnes's evening fire, burning for 2 to 3 hours each night in the stone hearth, added 10 to 12 degrees to the baseline, raising the living area to 55 or 58 degrees, a temperature she maintained with approximately 5 pounds of wood per day, less than 1/4 of what a conventional cabin would require. She was not cold. She was not hungry. The chickens she had acquired in December, housed in a small pen built against the exterior of the sealed upstream wall where the stone radiated enough warmth to keep them above freezing, provided 4 eggs a day. The root vegetables she had bartered for in autumn, potatoes, turnips, carrots, sat in the cool end of the tunnel at 45 degrees, as perfectly preserved as if they were in a commercial cold storage. The goat cheese she made from the milk of a nanny goat, acquired in November, sat on the stone shelf in the middle section, aging slowly in the cool, still air. The crisis came not from cold, but from water. On February 14th, a warm rain fell on frozen ground, 3 inches in 12 hours, melting the snowpack on the hills above the valley and sending a surge of water down Lick Creek that overtopped the banks and flooded the valley floor. The creek, swollen to 3 times its normal volume, rose to the level of the broken dam and poured through the gap, and a portion of that flow found the old channel, the original path to the mill race, and ran toward the upstream entrance of the tunnel. Agnes heard it before she saw it, a sound like distant applause, growing louder, resolving into the rush of moving water. She opened the canvas door and looked upstream and saw water running across the ground toward the sealed entrance wall. The wall held. The dry stacked stones were tight enough to resist a shallow flow. But water began seeping through the lower joints, pooling on the flagstone floor of the tunnel and advancing toward her living area. She worked for 6 hours in the dark. She packed clay into the joints of the upstream wall from inside, sealing each seep as it appeared, working by firelight with mud up to her elbows. She dug a shallow trench along the base of the interior wall to channel the seeping water toward the downstream end, where it could exit through the gap under the canvas door. She moved her supplies to the higher shelves, lifted the sleeping platform onto the stone supports, and relocated the chickens to the middle section of the tunnel where the floor was still dry. By morning, the rain had stopped. The creek receded. The seepage slowed to a trickle and then stopped. The tunnel floor was wet but undamaged. The flagstone had no joints to erode, no earth to wash away. Agnes mopped the water toward the downstream end with a broom of bundled hickory twigs and relit her fire. And by the following day, the tunnel was dry again, the stone walls undamaged, the barrel vault unaffected. The crisis survived without the loss of a single possession or a single degree of warmth from the massive stone walls that had held water for years and could certainly hold a widow for one more winter. The flood was what brought the visitors. Hicks the farmer, riding through the valley to check his cattle after the rain, stopped at the mill race to see if the widow had drowned. He found her splitting kindling outside the canvas door, the tunnel dry and warm behind her, the chickens clucking, the goat chewing hay in her pen. He brought his wife the following week, and his wife brought her sister, and her sister told Owen Price's wife, and Owen Price's wife told Owen, and in March, 4 months after his pronouncement at the feed store, Owen Price rode out to the Lyle mill site to see the drainage ditch for himself. He stood inside the tunnel for 10 minutes without speaking. He touched the walls. He looked at the barrel vault. He felt the flagstone floor, which was warm under his boots. He noted the fireplace, the sleeping platform, the shelves, the storage areas, the natural temperature gradient from warm at the hearth end to cool at the door end. He noted the chickens, the goat, the root vegetables preserved at 45 degrees, the cheese aging on the stone shelf. He noted that the air was clean, the ventilation adequate, the light sufficient from both the fire and the natural glow entering through the canvas door. "Mrs. Calhoun," he said, "I called this a culvert." "It was a mill race," Agnes said. "Now it's something else." "What is it?" Agnes looked at the barrel vault above her. the stone arch that had carried a creek and now carried her life, and she said, "The warmest room in the county, Mr. Price. Would you like some tea?" Thank you for watching this story on the warm floor. If it reminded you that water shapes stone and stone shapes a life, please share it. Subscribe for more stories from the frontier, and tell us in the comments, what would you have built? Owen Price did not apologize. He was not the kind of man who revised his public statements, but he did something more useful. He looked into the Lyle property dispute, determined that the heirs had effectively abandoned their claim through 6 years of inaction and unpaid taxes, and informed Agnes that she could file for adverse possession of the mill race and the surrounding acre for a fee of $1.50. She filed in April 1886 and received clear title the following year. By the spring of 1887, Agnes had expanded the homestead beyond the tunnel, a proper chicken coop outside, an expanded goat pen, a garden on the sunny slope above the race, a covered woodshed against the hillside. But the tunnel remained her home, all 42 feet of it, divided into its 3 zones, heated by the earth and the fire, and the 10,000 stones that the mason had laid to carry water, and that now carried something the mason had never imagined, the life of a woman who had looked at an empty channel and seen a full home. She lived in the mill race for 16 years. She never built a conventional house above ground, because no conventional house could match what the earth provided for free: constant temperature, windproof walls, fireproof structure, and the deep, still silence of a stone tunnel that held warmth the way a river holds its course, steadily, quietly, without effort or apology. Settle back, listen carefully, and journey with us through the legends, hard truths, and enduring wisdom of the American frontier. Subscribe to the warm floor. The fire is warm, the night is still, and the frontier has much to teach.